Good morning. Good morning to you all. Good morning. Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Good morning.
Okay. Now we start. Today we start a new session. Public sector budgeting. Right. So now we are starting budget. It's a very important topic in your syllabus. So public sector budgeting. Today we going to focus on uh, budgeting process. So this course unit about public sector budgeting process, perspectives and approaches, and today's session is about public budgeting and budget process. And we'll start uh, learning outcomes, objectives. So upon the completion of this subject, the students should be able to first define. So you have to find you're able to define what is public budget. You may study about budget in corporate sectors, companies, for individuals. Our focus on public budget. Public budget means what? The budget for the entire government at national level, national budget, if you convenient, right? So define public budget, identify its objectives and scopes, and explain budget cycle or budget process and models. You can understand that budget is a step-by-step process. So be able to explain the budget cycle and budget process, and there are some few models in public budgeting, and describe the principles for sound budgeting and public financial management. So these are the learning outcomes of this chapter. Budgeting in public sector, that is our focus on public budget. So what is the purpose? Public budget ultimately to create public value. So when we concern the budget in companies, so what is the purpose of budget in companies, in private sector? To maximize the wealth of its owners, shareholders, maximize the wealth of shareholders. That is the objectives. They are preparing the private sector budget is prepared to create wealth to their owners, shareholders. So Mark Morse in 1995 argues that public managers. So we have already discussed and defined and who is public managers in public sector organization. So it starts from where Minister of Finance, Treasuries, Secretary of the Treasury, and the Chief Accounting Officer. Chief Accounting Officer we call always secretary to the line ministry. Take the role of Chief Accounting Officer. An accounting officer is the head of department, head of institutions, accounting officer. So those parties are we call public managers, especially in finance management. So Mark Moose 1995 argues that public managers spending public money are expected to create public value. Public value, value for money. Value for money. So each rupees spent from the public fund should add any value to the public. So that's called what? Value for money. Spending public money are expected to create value. When we concern in private sector, the private sector managers are expected to increase shareholders' value, shareholders' wealth. but in public sector, profit, there's no profit motive in general. So therefore, the government spend, each rupees is spent from the public money to provide or to create value. So in this process of public value creation, more conceptualized challenges facing public managers and call it strategic triangle. So there's a triangle. You can find the Moose has developed, conceptualized a model. It has three things. The three key questions managers must answer in testing the adequacy of their vision of organizational purpose. So when preparing the public public managers, when preparing budget, they have to answer three questions according to the Moose conceptualization. When answering these three questions, they can test whether the budget prepared by them is adequate to achieve the vision of the government. Three key questions managers must answer in testing adequacy of their vision of organizational purpose. Here the organization means the government sector, all the political system, the governing system of the country. First, whether the purpose is publicly valuable, the money spent from public fund is valuable to the public. Purpose is publicly valuable. Number two, whether it will be politically and legally supported. Politically and legally supported. You know, the budget process in our countries, in many countries like us, the budget to be seen as strategic tools for their political stability. Through budget, the ruling party wanted to show their power and their influence to the world, to the public. So whether it will be politically and legally supported. At the same time, they have to show their political strength, political stability, as well as it should not violate their uh, the constitutions, the law. So they have to adhere with illegal support. No, it means they have to support, they have to provide, they have to present the budget in the parliament in front of representative of the citizens. Number three, whether it is administratively and operationally feasible. Administratively and operationally feasible. So the finance minister especially is the chief of public fund. So he prepares the budget. When he prepares the budget, he should answer three questions to test the adequacy of their budget with regard to the vision of the government. Here these three: public budget. The public budget is to create public value. So in the center you can find public value. All three these views should create a public value. First, whether it will be politically and legally supported. It shows the government strength, ruling party's strength, as well as it should not violate the constitution's arrangements. It should pass us through the parliament. Next question, whether the purpose is publicly valuable. The money is spent from the public fund. Do create value, to create value. to the public, not for individuals, not for ministers, not for MPs, but it should add value to the public as whole, not individual. And whether the third question is whether it is administratively and operationally feasible. Sometimes the budget preparer sometimes wanted to show their talent, but sometimes it cannot be practicably applicable. It is not practicably implemented. So when they're preparing budget, they have to ask a question whether it is administratively and operationally feasible. So this is the Mark Moore's strategic triangle. If public budget expenditure's purpose is to create public value, then it would be, number one, it is an expression of how public budget expenditure will create public value. They have to answer. They have to explain how the public budget expenditure will create value. So you know that creating public value is one of the main objectives of preparing public budget. If they prepare to do so, they have to explain how it's going to create public value. The second, the budget therefore would need to capture three elements of strategic triangle. So if the budget is adequate to create public value, they have to meet three criteria established by Mark Moose. If the budget is not capable enough to answer these three strategic triangle questions, the budget is not adequate enough. So later, Banti 2015 proposes a budget triangle. Already Mark Moose created a triangle. Later, Banti 2015 also proposes a budget triangle as a parallel to Mark Moore's strategic triangle. You see it here. The budget triangle, here, the level of income and borrowings. So these are the fund inflows. These are the source of fund inflow, money inflows. The level of income and borrowing. This determines the capacity of public budget expenditure. So your expenditure depends on what? The source of fund, where the money comes from. If the government able to spend 1 billion, then your expenditure is limited to 1 billion. So it's a capacity. The incomes and borrowings determines the capacity of public budget expenditure. The planned expenditure and investment. Here the expenditure they are mentioning, the concerning about recurrent expenditure. Investment is a capital expenditure, right? Construction of bridges, construction of buildings, building complexes, apartments. So that kind of things, investments. So the planned expenditure and investment. This indicates the resources that are to be converted into goods and services that are valued by public. So if the government spend money to establish bridge or to establish a new road network, it will create value, can justify it. The resource here they're mentioning, resource means financial resources. The financial resources that are to be converted into goods or services that are valued by public. Here the public money, the money available in the treasury, converted as a bridge, or the road network, or the books, school textbooks, are the goods. Health services, the public money is converted as public services, health services in the hospital. If you are getting education, free education from the state universities, it's mean the government, the public money is converted as a services. By spending money, they should create value, and then approval by the organization's highest level of governance. So what is the highest level of governance in our country? Our country's highest level of governance is what? Where? Any answers? Highest level of governance? To whom? The Ministry of Finance. Answerable. Where the questions arises? Where? Any answers? Simply, it's a parliament. So parliament is our country's highest level of governance. The government, the executive people should answerable, accountable to the parliament. So this is triangle, budget triangle. So this budget triangle is based on who prepares here? Bandy. This is the Bandy's triangle. This triangle is Bandy 2015. So this triangle moves. Here, based on Bandy triangle, Bandy 2015, here create public value. So when you look at the Moore's triangle, also create public value. So his perspective is a little bit different, but here the Bandy, to create public value, he should establish 3 criteria. So income and borrowings. First one is a source of income. Expenditure and investment, it is what? The way of spending money, allocation of money. And third one is approval. Approval taken from, normally is taken from the parliament. Now we see the classical rules of budgetary theory. Classical rules. What are those? The first one, utility. First one, utility. Classical rules of budgetary theory. Utility. Balanced budget. You know what is balanced? Income, or the source of income, should be equal to not more than this one, not more than expenditure. Balanced budget. Non-hypothecation of income. Gross expenditure principle. Annuality in specification. So these are the classical rules of budgetary theory. Budget. Now you should define what is budget. A budget is a quantitative plan. A budget is a quantitative plan. You can find numbers, you can find figures in terms of rupees. A budget is a quantitative plan for the future, a forthcoming accounting period. Its purpose is multi-faced and is intended to, when you look at the budget, it's actually it's a law. Once it's voted in the parliament, now it's become a law. It has multiple purposes, multiple purpose, not for a single activities, not for a single department, not for a single ministry. This budget is applicable to all public sector organizations. From this budget, not only public sector people affected on this, and private sector also will affect. The new tax rate, new concessionaries will be announced in the budget. The budget is a quantitative plan for forthcoming accounting period. Its purpose is multi-phased, and is intended to. So what's the purpose of the budget? Define an envelope, or define a basket of total public spending for the year ahead. How much total spending of the government for the next year? So the budget help with planning and making choices among priorities. When you look at the budget, we can find on which sector the government prefers. When we go through the budget, we can understand what is the government policy is. So it's a plan, right? It's a plan and making the choices among priorities. There are a lot of choices, and based on the government policy, they are prioritized. Coordinate activities of an organization of the state. So once the budget is voted in the parliament, it's become effective and it's ready to implement. So based on the budget, all government finance activities are coordinated of an organization of the state. Here the organizations mean here, but there are different type of organizations in the government sector, and the state. The state mean here provincial, like the local government. Communicate objectives to the relevant people or the organization. Communicate. The budget is a document from which the government is communicate with public. Monitor the performance against the plan. The budget is a plan. So based on the budget, the programs are executed. The policies are executed in the operational level, grassroots level. Government wanted to monitor whether everything's are going in line with the plan. So what's the tool? So they have to monitor, to control, they have to have a standard. They compare actual progress based against the standard. So here, what is standard? The standard is the budget. For example, for a certain activity, the government allocated the budget. In the budget, government allocated say 100 million, and the actual budget is actual expenditure goes beyond 150 million. So that's a deviation. So in this way, the government can monitor the performance against the plan. The plan is what? The budget. Control activities, and budget may also be used for controlling the expenditure. Evaluate the performance of department and agencies. When they are proposing budget, they are setting some targets, for each department and agencies. So for example, a particular, for example, Ministry of Agriculture, they wanted to produce 10,000 acres of additional new land for agriculture, and at the end of the year they have to check whether the Ministry of Agriculture has accomplished their task, performed well. The multiple purposes that public budgeting serves are generally the legislative control of executives. For the executives, cabinet of ministers, Minister of Finance, line ministers, and department heads, who are the executives. Here, who is controlling these executives? Who is controlling these executives? Who is controlled? The cabinet of minister, Minister of Finance, line ministers, and department heads. The parliament, the legislative control of the executives. They are accountable in the parliament. When the Minister of Finance propose budget in the parliament, they have to take the approval. Without the approval of the parliament, they can't do so. They can't spend even 1 rupees from the government money. So they are accountable to the parliament. Macroeconomic stability. They have to keep, the government is responsible to keep the inflation rate at reasonable level, and they have to maintain the interest rate that induce the economic growth. They have to control the foreign exchange rate, the value of the money, value of the rupees. They have to maintain employment rate. They have to have some sort of export during that period, foreign reserve. Allocation of strategic priorities. The best example in the recent past. What is that? Organic, chemical. Organic versus chemical. Due to that, our country now paying for that priorities. The managerial efficiency. The budget, the purpose is to improve the managerial efficiency. The nature of the above purposes make budget reform an ongoing task. Right? It's not a one-day program, or it's not a one-year activity. So it's not a ready-made, standalone activity. It's a process. The nature of budget, the above purpose make budget reform again and again. They have to reform, they have to develop, they have to improve the budget, they have to improve. That's why it says a pilgrimage more than a destination. People are go to pilgrimage, for example, Kadirkam. People are visit for that area, visit for that place. What's the purpose? Just to arrive that place, or to have they have some other motives. The national budget, national budget is a document that once approved by the legislature, that is parliament, it's approved by the parliament, authorities, the government, to raise revenue, incur debt, and effect expenditure in order to achieve a certain goals. So through the budget, the governing party, the authorities, the executives will take the power to raise revenue, to collect money in the way of income and in the way of debt, how much they can borrow locally or internationally. Borrow fund, even to borrow fund, they have to seek the approval. So by the way of budget speech, in the budget they have to take the approval to get the loan. And affect expenditures. There are several departments, ministries, organization in the government sector. They have to allocate that money. So all the money is collected, raised in the way of income, in the way of debt. The money will be spent, allocated to the other government institutions. So all the things are happening through the budget. The budget is a document once approved by the legislation, authorities, the government, to raise revenue, incur debt, affect expenditure in order to achieve certain goals. Since the budget determines the origin and application of public financial resources, since the budget determines the origin and application of public financial resources, it plays a central role in the process of the government. In the budget explains the origin of income, the source of income, and the application of public financial resources, how to allocate the money across the public sector organizations. It has both parties, income and expenditure. It plays a central role in the process of government fulfilling economic, political, social, legal, and administrative functions. A single document dominates everything, the government. A single document, that is what? The budget. If the budget is not prepared well, effectively, our economic will go down. Recession, crisis will incur. If the budget proposed by the ruling party is not acceptable by the citizens, the citizens of the country will start protects against the government. The government will lose the support of the citizens if the budget is not effective one. Social balances, there are a lot of people under the poverty, and there are people above, rich and richer, there are middle classes, so they have to balance. The government try to give some subsidies, some grants to the people who are living under the poverty line. They are getting what kind of subsidies in the form of samurti, in other ways. For what? They have to maintain the balance in the society. Legal, they have to compliance with the legal requirements. Administrative functions, it will affect everything. Now we'll discuss about the economic function of the budget. Economic function, the budget. The budget is the state's financial plan. Budget is not a single document. It's a document, but it's a state, the national financial plan. Budget is the national financial plan. As a tool of economic policy, the budget is used as a tool for economic policy. The budget is the means by which government seeks to achieve three economic financial goals. You can find what is the how So what's the plan of the government with regards to economic? We can find three key economic goals in the budget. First, fiscal discipline or financial discipline. How? By controlling aggregate expenditure in line with macroeconomic constraints. For some sectors, for some organization, for some activities, government allocate more money. Government allocate a high amount of money spending. Government grants. So fiscal discipline by controlling aggregate expenditure. So the government spending impact on money supply, money demand, inflation, etc. So they have to have a clear eye on the financial discipline, so by way of controlling aggregate expenditure, aggregate total expenditure. You may study the Keynesian economy. Keynesian economy. In the basic economy, you can find the individual, household, and firms, and government enters as the third entity. So it has two things: the government tax and government expenditure. Government expenditure. Now we are focusing on this government expenditure. So this government expenditure will impact on the macroeconomic cycle, Keynesian economy. Secondly, the allocation of resources in line with government policy priorities. Government policy priorities. The government now the government give more priority for organic agriculture. It's a common example. Everybody can understand. Government not allocated money for the chemical fertilizer. They not allocate money. And the government not allocate money to import vehicles from abroad. And government is not allocating money to import milk powder. In which you can find the government wants to motivate the local production, the local production of milk, the local production of vehicles. They wanted to restrict the imports, and the government wanted to appreciate, promote the export. Thirdly, the economic. Efficient and effective use of resources in achieving its policy goals. Policy goals. Here, policy goals mean what? For example, government give priorities to export motive businesses, export backed businesses, or dollar earning businesses. So government give more and more grant, more expenditure to promote export oriented businesses. Look at this political function. Second one, political function. The budget process ensures the people's representatives scrutinize and approve raising of taxes, controlling of debts, and application of public fund by the government. Here, application of fund mean allocation of money for spending. In the parliament, you can find representatives of the citizens of the country, representatives. The government wanted to scrutinize. They have to get approval from them. They have to approval from the parliament. Even when they impose any taxes, and they wanted to contracting any debts, if they wanted to get loan from China or India or whatever the country, they have to take approval from the budget. approval from the parliament through budget, and the application of public fund, how they are going to allocate the money. So all these three things we can find a single document, that is budget. This is achieved through a formal separation of power. In the parliament you can find opposition party and ruling party. You can find ruling party and opposition party. The ruling party prepare government policy and budget, and they have to submit in the parliament. Opposition parties and other or MPs, member of parliament, ask questions, raise questions against the proposals, the budget. This is achieved through a formal separation of power. Government proposes the budget, which is approved by the parliament, then executed by the government. Once the proposed budget approved by the parliament, now the budget is ready to implement, ready to execute, and finally subject to monitoring and appraisal by the parliament to ensure compliance. They are spending money, right? After getting the approval, they execute the budget, spending money, and also they have to report to the parliament how they spend, the performance report. This report submitted by the COPA, and the Auditor General Department. They have to submit the report to the parliament. So for what? To ensure the compliance, no expenditure exceeds their plan, the budget. So that kind of things they have to submit. Now you see the legal function. So we already talked about economic function of the budget and political function of the budget. Now we see the legal functions. Enactment. Now it's become what? Law. Enactment of the budget in law by parliament limits the power of the government. And in the parliament, the ruling party, the government, proposes the budget. Without proposing budget, the government cannot raise any tax, any revenue, or they not undergo any debt agreement locally or internationally, or even they can allocate single rupees without the approval of the parliament. So the government, the power of the government is restricted by the parliament. The enact of the budget, a law by parliament, limits the power of the government. Since the government may not raise taxes, that have not been approved by the parliament, and may not exceed the parliament's expenditure appropriations. The budget, in the budget speech, they allocated 1 billion rupees for a particular project. Then it is approved by the parliament. After that, they don't have rights to exceed this limit, exceed this 1 billion for that activity. It means they have taken the approval only for that amount, specified amount. An auditor here mentioning what? The Auditor General. An auditor usually accountable to the parliament scrutinize the budget to ensure compliance with parliamentary authorities. Institutions and individual managers. Institutions and individual. Institution here, ministry, secretary to the ministry, and head of the institutions, chairman of the government organization, institution, right? Institution and individual managers who fail to comply For instance, spending in excess of the parliamentary appropriation. As I told you here, the parliament given approval to spend only 1 billion, but a particular minister or the head of the department spend above the limit are accountable before the law. The law means what? The parliament. The budget speech, once it's voted, it's become the power and become the law. The managerial functions. The budget, it's a tool, it's a managerial tool. The budget is used as a managerial tool. The budget communicates the government policy. When you hear the budget speech, you can observe, we can understand what is the policy of the government. The budget communicates the government policy to the public institutions by informing them how much may be spent for what purpose, thereby guiding policy implementation. In some budgeting system, this function may be reinforced by inclusion of specific service performance targets within budget document. So in some countries, they have to submit a detailed budget. In that budget, they have to include specific service performance targets. But normally in our country, we don't have that kind of detailed budget. And the next section is budget cycle, and it takes a long time. So it's better to start in the next session.